Stephanie Cuvelier, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ed.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Why are you doing great?
Because it's a sunny day. I've done a nice day of work with wonderful people, got my exercise in, and life is always good.
Are you a sunny weather person?
I'm very much a sunny weather person.
Likewise.
Anything cold, wet, not quite my thing, but I'll make the most out of it.
It's so blue right now in Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's really nice. Go on the waterfront every time. It makes me feel happy. So
yeah, we're so lucky to have that little park just around the corner. And I was just there just before this podcast and just looking out at IFC and Central and TST combined together. We got an amazing view of the middle.
Yeah,
and I was just looking at it thinking this is so fucking cool that I get to see
right
this all
through
day.
at the moment. I went there yesterday and it's so clear. So.
Super clear. Well, you said just now it's been a great day because you did a bit of work and you love what you do. What do you do?
I am by trade a personal trainer. I run my own business. My specialty is in mobility and rehab, but having been a former athlete, I love to do athletic development as well. But actually mobility is probably the foundation of all of that. I'm a new mum as well, so pre and postnatal training is also huge for me. I think in simple terms, I just like to help people move better. But yeah, if I had to put a label on it, I guess I would be a trainer who specializes in mobility.
Do you struggle with a label when it comes to your job?
Yes, very much
me
so.
too.
I don't like to put I actually studied exercise physiology. So back when I was at uni, that was very much, you didn't want to call yourself a personal trainer because it felt like you were downgrading yourself. I don't care what the label is as long as I get to share what it is. So now I tell people what I do in terms of how I can help them, as opposed to saying I'm a personal trainer, because that's very much an umbrella term nowadays. So yeah.
When you studied exercise physiology, did you know that you would end up in coaching?
No, actually. If I'm being totally honest, I didn't know what exercise physiology was going in. I knew I loved sport and I was a sunny weather person. So being a young 17-year-old, I thought I'm going to go somewhere where I'm going to be happy, which was Australia. Great place to go for uni. And I took my sport very seriously. So I wanted to be somewhere where I could do that as well. And rugby, netball, all of that was really good over there. So I thought of health and exercise science, and I also thought of physiotherapy. But my mum, being an Asian mum, also said, if you go down the physiotherapy path, it's going to be very tiring because you're going to be massaging people all day long. So she had a fair point in that it's a very hands-on job. I mean, what I do now is also very hands-on, but for me, it's not as static, because I would think if I were on over a massage bed or a physio bed the entire time, you're actually always in crouched over positions, and posture-wise, you don't have as much freedom as what you do now. But when I did exercise physiology, it was clinic-based. So I didn't know what it was. We were very much working with the elderly, metabolic disease, cancer patients, all sorts. And we actually had to do 150 hours in each population.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. And you got yourself exposed to everything. And one of my favorites was actually spinal cord injury. So leading up to the end of my uni, when we were doing practicums, you're getting job offers and you're looking at where you want to go. It was kind of a fork in my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was going to stay in Sydney to work in the spinal cord injury clinic. But then the offer to possibly come back to Hong Kong to play rugby was an option. And I've always known that rugby isn't forever. Sport for me, it's always been something that I love. It's been a bonus. But I never thought I would have a career in it, especially not as a female. So I guess the novelty of knowing that, female athletes, professional, rugby is going to be a thing now. That was super cool. So life is short, and I don't know what went through my mind. I was young, but I also knew to seize the day. So, I ended up coming back to Hong Kong and taking my chances. But the downside to that was I didn't get as much, not work experience. I did it when I was at uni, but I didn't get to live as a young adult in a foreign country. I came back home, and I came back to live at home as well, because that's kind of what you do in Hong Kong, right? You can't really afford to jump back in. You don't have a salary yet, so you're not going to go rent an apartment, which is going to cost a bomb. So I think I came back to my comfort zone in many ways, but at the same time, going away was one of the best decisions I could have done. And this is going back a little bit before I even went to Australia. I thought about staying here because I could get a scholarship and play rugby for Hong Kong. So it was very much like a small bubble. You kind of stay in it, and at the time I thought it was more to be able to take like a financial burden off my family. So I knew that, well, if I'm on a scholarship, you don't have to worry about me. It's all sorted. But the best thing that happened was that my 2 older sisters actually called me the day before I handed in my acceptance letter. And they're like, don't do it. They're like, as great as an opportunity that is, and we understand that you want to play rugby for Hong Kong. They never really understood it. But they're like, you've got to get out of Hong Kong. You got to live. Our parents have worked so hard their entire lives to be able to give us a better future. And so you got to take it, not just to play overseas, but to live outside. And I'm so grateful for that. And so I did. I listened to my older sisters, and then I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to stay in Hong Kong. And then I started looking at unis in Australia, and it's kind of led me down the path that I'm on now. So yeah, so I ended up back in Hong Kong, and then I never knew I'd be doing what I do now. I didn't think that would be what I'd be doing because I didn't plan for it, in that there was no paved path. Coming back, it was so much more, you think you go into a job and that's just the way it is. Someone's going to tell you what to do. But being an exercise physiologist with a clinical background, I looked for jobs over here and there was no such thing. So I was like, well, shit, what do I do? Like, I'm not just going to be a rugby player. And I mean that in the nicest way. I don't say that in a negative light, but I didn't know where my future lay. So I always knew that outside of rugby, I had to have something else to fall back on because you can get injured. And if you do, then what? And I learned a lot of that along the way, battling injury and then realizing that you're really quite literally just a piece of meat. You're another team member. And if you're not playing, you're going to get replaced anyway. So it was a rude awakening, but I'm also really thankful that I knew to start my own thing on the side, just to keep my brain stimulated with something outside of rugby. So at uni, I fell in love with learning about anatomy. We did functional anatomy, and we actually had wet lab lessons. So we were in the lab 3 hours at a time, 2 times a week, and we were learning off of cadavers. And as the first time I went in there, like the smell of it, you're just like, oh my God, dead bodies. You kind of get over it quite quickly because you don't see it as a dead body anymore. You actually see things for how they work, and it's like you can switch off, and biomechanics, all of that was just so amazing. And being an athlete, learning about your body made it so much more interesting because you knew this is why it works. And there was so much more whys, but also the moment you found out one thing, you could delve deeper because the human body is so complex. It's not just muscles and bones. You go into nerves, you go into tendons, you go into the nervous system. There's just so much to take in, and there's no wonder why doctors have specialties in every area. Being a GP, it's really hard to know everything, and no one does. So I think I fell more in love with the anatomy side, the biomechanics side, and I've been terrible at science growing up. So I never thought I'd go down human movement. But I think I learn in a different style. And for me, it was very much like kinesthetic learning. So by doing, I understood it, and I might not be able to explain it in a way that is textbook, but I can use metaphors. I can use like visual representations. And I found that really worked for me. And then in turn, it worked a lot for the one-on-one clients that I had on the side of rugby. And so it just kind of slowly started growing, and my mission was really to start exposing people to what exercise physiology was. And I think people nowadays still don't know what it is.
So how do you define it? How do you define exercise physiology to the general public?
I say it's the bridge between physiotherapy and personal training, or like returning back to the gym, because you have a lot more knowledge about the human body, and it's not just about the exercises. And often if you were to graduate from a rehab program going to a physio, they're like, okay, right, 12 weeks later, you're good to go. You can go back to the gym. You go back to the gym and you're like, what do I do? Where do I start? I'm going to do a couple of these, a couple of those. It's very generic. There's no one to really guide you safely into, okay, you've just had this injury. We still need a graded approach. You might have done the static rehab or the small stuff with the physio, but it doesn't necessarily translate into the bigger movements that you do in everyday life, which is like functional exercise. So yeah, and because there was no such thing as exercise physiology in Hong Kong, I was like, well, I could go study physio, which is going to be another 4 years, or I could just go down the personal training path, get straight into working, and then just educate that way. So education's been a big part of what I do since day one. And I think it was because I didn't know how to explain what I did to anyone else. And now it's been amazing because that's actually a huge core component of what I do. It's educating people about the human body. And it's not just how the body works, but how the mind connects to the body. And I don't have to go into the detail of that, but you also recognize that everything is connected.
Was there an experience that you had personally in your life that showed you or emphasized how connected it all is, or is that something you were actually learning at university? Because that's something certainly that I didn't connect to way later in my career.
I think it was the first injury that I had when I dislocated my shoulder for the first time. And I didn't want to go for surgery at the time because that would mean missing out on certain tournaments. So I opted for conservative rehab. I never realized how hypermobile my joints were, though. So the first time I stepped into the gym, I can still remember it. And it was the most embarrassing time of my life. But I don't think you were there. But it was when it was my first gym program with rugby. And I just remember it was like...
South China?
At South China, yeah. I won't name who, but when I first went in, girls and the guys teams were training, you know, those early morning sessions. And I just remember them saying like, okay, great. Like 17-year-old female, jump in, go do a back squat with bands, like banded explosive back squats. And I was like, what does that mean? Just do it. I got under it and it was just, the bands pulled me back down. And basically fell over and I was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. So from then on, I was like, I don't think I'm going to do that again. But luckily they realized like, okay, you've never done this before. So let's start over here. And I was never guided actually fully into learning how to get into the gym. But being at uni, having been a scholarship athlete, I had access to the gym. I had free access to go in. And the more I learned about human movement, the more I could apply it into my gym program. So I experimented on my body a lot when I was at uni through dietary stuff. And I was friends with the rugby guys in my course and we just gelled because we had common language. So we trained together. I didn't realize I was bulking at one point because I was eating what they were eating. And you learn there, right? So when I recognized, I was like, what am I doing? And I guess I'm a very curious person. So when things are happening, I ask why. And when things aren't happening, I also ask why, and it's a journey. And I realize that you have to try everything on yourself before you can tell anyone else how to do it.
So it's interesting your fascination and love for mobility, in your own experience as an athlete, being someone hypermobile. I'm like the complete opposite. My like fascination and mobility has come from being super tight from the day I can remember. You know, like I've even looked back at childhood photos, like mum and dad's photo albums, and I tried to find a photo of me in a squat because I genuinely I can't remember a time where I've ever been able to sit in a full arse grass squat. I even remember like, you know, under sevens rugby and football team photos, and I'd always be in the front because I was small, and having to sit in a squat and being 20 seconds in being like, I've got to stand, like feeling like my knees were going to explode.
Really?
And so I said to mum and dad, I was like, okay, I need to actually just see it. I need to see with my own eyes that at one point in time, I was able to sit in a squat. And I genuinely have not ever found a photo. Even as like a 5-year-old, I'm like on one knee or I'm just like slouching on the floor.
What went wrong?
And Ant's in a squat in all the photos.
Really?
Yeah, it's really, really crazy. Like it's as a family feeding pigeons and Ant's in a full squat and I'm kneeling on one knee. And so I actually wonder.
From a young age.
Yeah, seriously. So that's what, you know, spikes my interest. And like I realized that all my shoulder injuries as a young adult came from just not having range. And, you know, it was like whenever there was a contact and force applied to the joint, which would take it out of its range, I would break and snap. And so life came about, especially moving into CrossFit where you need range of motion. And I didn't have any of it. It was like, okay, I need to learn about this stuff. And that's where mine came from. But yours was very different beginnings as an athlete.
I think the beginning of an athlete was actually more lack of strength. And
at ranges.
I didn't realize I was never necessarily like the most flexible person. I've definitely gotten way better over time having learned more about it. But like I couldn't do the splits or anything like that. And I learned that along the way. And I, on the surface, would have thought that go do yoga, you'll learn how to do it. You know, like they all know how to do it. But it was so much deeper than that. And it wasn't until I was in the professional setup that I started doing a little bit more, it was the recovery side. It was actually understanding that you are going nonstop, going hard during trainings, that you needed the downtime. And I looked around my team, and it's true. No one did the stretching.
No.
And
I never did.
And you think it's stretching, right? But mobility is more than stretching. But that's all we knew at the time. So the industry is ever evolving, and there's so much more out there now. But I still think it's a very underutilized type of training.
So when I look at your Instagram, because you post a lot of really great content, a lot of it around mobility. When I look at what you're doing in your own practice and what you're sharing with a lot of people, I see a lot of like loaded end range stretching. I see a lot of cars. I see a lot of FRC like influence. I do see some yoga flow.
Yeah.
Like a lot of downward dogs and like flow style routines. So like, what have been some of the biggest influences on the way that, let's kind of keep it around mobility? Because I know you prescribe a lot more than just mobility training, but what has influenced your protocols as a coach now?
I think the FRC was actually one of the most influential ones. It was the first system that I came across that was like, this is what we've been trying to talk about, because I'd learned about human movement, but you had to try to make things up to make it work. But because there was nothing backing you couldn't really like say it's research backed, right? So
let's talk about it, because that had a massive influence. We actually did it together.
Yeah.
We did it here. So yeah, what were the massive things that you took away from that?
How do I say it? I just loved having the medical side, and actually they explain the anatomy down to the tissue level. And not everyone needs to know that, but that brought me back to my uni days. So when you go into that level of detail and people can explain it in a way when they talk about bioflow, I really like that analogy of talking about how everything just flows into the next. We as humans tend to categorize everything as this is a muscle, this is a bone. And yes, those structures do exist, but when it comes to movement and you picture a dancer moving, it's fluid. And we should be moving in that style as well. So when they started talking about how everything links together, but more importantly, it's about the joint range of motion. If you cannot own your joint range of motion, you can't do anything else. So that was a huge, mind-blowing kind of statement.
Let's dissect that even more.
Okay.
So like in layman's term, what are we saying there?
It's like the joint workspace, right? So I always think of a mortar and pestle. So every single joint is capable of rotational movement, whether or not you think of it. And you've been through a number of knee issues. I've also been through knee issues. I didn't ever think that at the time. I didn't know the FRC stuff when I was actually going through my ACL rehab. And I so wish I did, because as much as I knew tibial rotation was a thing, I'd studied anatomy, I didn't know how to train it. So the FRC didn't necessarily give me an exercise manual, and that's what I loved about it. They're saying you can do whatever you want with it.
Once you understand the principles,
Exactly.
you can just experiment.
And I think that, like someone like you as well, you go further into learning more. You want to know the topic, you want to understand it more, but people can go through certifications, get the certification, and not really get it. And then they say, yep, I'm certified, come with me, I'm going to train like this. And you look at their training, there's not a single part of it that's been implemented into it. When I've personally felt like after studying it the first time, I could have continued to study the notes from that first time for the next 2 years and continue to dissect it.
I did.
Yeah, I had lectures. I wrote notes every time I was on a plane when we could travel before COVID. I was rewriting it so that I could understand it again. And I mean, that's just the nerdy side of me. I love to read. I love to do all that stuff. I love to understand things. And when Kinstretch came out, also, I love the whole protocol, but it's a branding thing as well, right? It's basically the class version of the FRC protocol.
So it's basically how to take the principles of FRC, which is a lot of it is around like joint mobility, and apply it in a group class setting. They had a course that would teach you as a coach or practitioner how to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I totally get on a business standpoint why you would also label certain things, but the underlying principles were understand joint range of motion, also understand your anatomy, and then you can build off of it. And I thought that was the biggest takeaway for me. So I did go ahead and do the Kinstretch. I flew over to Korea and I did that again. But again, being totally honest, I loved it, but it was also just, I was relearning everything that I learned in the first one. But it was nice to have that practice to continue to consolidate what I had learned and continue to cement it into my brain.
Yeah, so I think some things I'm trying to find ways that we can, break this down even more. So I guess things that I had done a lot of was, okay, I want to improve my squat. all right, I want to improve the bottom of my squat position. So I would spend time in the squat, and I think that's a really good thing to do.
Yeah.
But I would do things like push my knees out, pull my knees in, do like different forms of duck walking. But what I would find was that the squat, the squat pattern where I felt strongest would improve a bit to the point where I couldn't improve anymore. But I wasn't making improvements elsewhere. And it wasn't until I actually looked at the individual joints that contribute to the squat. So look at the foot, look at the toes. I love that FRC went down to the minutiae of the toes, because I do toe work every day now. And it's like, look at rotation of the knee, and then look at rotation of the hip.
Yeah.
And when I actually started breaking each of those down, then I started to see, that's why I can't drop my knees in a squat like everyone else can, because I've got no internal rotation on my hip. So rather than just doing more squatting or spending more time in a squat or doing these kind of weird like floor patterns, I actually, if I just do some hip internal rotation work, and what that entails, they have lots of different protocols. Yeah. But I'm probably going to be able to do the things that I haven't been able to do. I've been trying to do for the last 2 years by just doing more squat work. And that for me was like the massive light bulb. It's like looking at each and every joint. And then, okay, this is a mistake that I made. I wouldn't say it's a mistake actually, but I just didn't keep my mobility training in the context of what my overarching goals were. So I basically went from FRC and was like, okay, I need to make every single joint unbelievable. So like I'm gonna be able to do middle splits, front splits, shoulder dislocates, like all this crazy shit. And so I started like putting a lot of time into that, and I realized then I had no more time to do anything else. So the thing that I actually really wanted to improve
takes forever.
What I really wanted to improve was to be better at snatching, better at walking on my hands, and doing like cool shit in CrossFit. And so that was like this was the vehicle to get me there. But then you learn, exactly as you said, like it takes a lot of time. It's really draining on the nervous system. So I always just viewed mobility training as like parasympathetic activity. So like it's not strength training, it's relaxing, it's calming. And when I started doing pails and rails, which is basically isometrics at your end ranges, hard cars, like controlled articular rotations, I was like knackered and I was sore the next day. It was a proper
training session, right? Sometimes even more tiring, like mentally, than a hardcore training session that you would do, right?
So the thing that I struggled with, and this probably like comes back to some body image issues from like a youngster, was that I saw the validity in the training improving function and ultimately performance, but it meant that I was spending my credits doing training that wasn't contributing to my body composition. So it was like, okay, hip internal rotation, cars and pails and rails for 10 minutes, or bench pressing. I'm gonna go for bench pressing. So those two things that I was like a constant pulling and tugging for me that never really allowed me to commit fully to like going all into the mobility training. But I still saw really big improvements. But I guess it was all relative to what I wanted to achieve. It was like I improved my snatch position, I improved my overhead position, I improved my squat position to the point where I was satisfied. So now it's kind of just into maintenance mode.
I think that's the thing. What you see on Instagram isn't always the training that they're doing every day, right? And it's fun to put cool shit up on Instagram because people are like, whoa, I mean, it hooks people in. That's not the reason why.
I never put cool mobility shit on Instagram, by the way, because mobility is not impressive.
But it's about the process, right? Like it's everything that you do. It's everything that you do in between to be able to hit those goals, which like you said, you want to snatch, you want to perform better with your CrossFit. For me, at the moment, I don't have as many goals because I'm not playing sport. And that's always been something that drove my goal setting. So after, it was actually when I did my knee that I was like, you know what, this is the time I can really hone in on my rehab. I just want to be able to move as good as I can. And I did the course after that. And then I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to start getting into my hips. I knew hips were the key to knee rehab. I just didn't know what to do. It was same as what you said. I'm just going to open my hips up. I'm just going to squat low. I'm going to get the range of motion that my knee needs. But the other takeaway from the course was when you talk about injury, they always say there's no such thing as injury prevention because accidents happen, right? And when you get injured, often there was something, okay, if it's a traumatic injury, different story. But there are two cases. If it's an overuse injury, your body was also just breaking down up to the point because you kept doing the same movement patterns over and over again till the point that, something's got to give. So when I think about injury now, and I actually work a lot with people with chronic injuries, acute injuries, all of the above. But I like to use the saying that they said is we want to get you stronger than you were before the injury. Let's not just get you back to where you were before you get injured. Let's get even better. And when people say we're bulletproofing the joints, I'm not necessarily saying you can bulletproof anything, but when you can prepare yourself as much as you can so that if you were to roll your ankle, you're not going to snap your ligaments because you've got the range of motion. And I think that probably applies to how you got injured as a youngster.
Yep.
Is I had the opposite. I had so much range of motion that when I kept spraining my ankles, it's because they were so loosey-goosey, right? Whereas for you, it's like the moment you sprain it, it's everything gone, right?
Yep.
So finding the happy medium between the two. And like I still want to go back and play sport, and I did. And I'm glad I had that goal to set. If I went back to a competitive setting now I want to train a bit more like an athlete. I want my explosive power back. I want to sprint. I want to do all of that. But those weren't my priorities at the time. My priority was to learn to move better, and it was more a longevity goal to be able to know that I don't want to be in pain because I've had multiple surgeries on my body now. And I've also recognized that every time you have a surgery, as much as things are fixed, you don't move the same again. So when you don't move the same again, the body holds on to it. And I don't know if you know that book, The Body Keeps Score.
Yep.
That was a huge one for me as well. I'm like, your body will remember everything that you do to it. And I just realized, and I'm glad I realized at a younger age, like I found health and wellness and all of that from quite a young age. I didn't have to wait till I was past 30 to recognize that why am I in bits? Like I learned about it beforehand, and exercise physiology taught me it's about prevention. It's about the lifestyle that you lead now is what you're going to have in the long term. And I looked around me, I looked at my parents and just in general, people are always saying like, oh, I did this when I was young and now I'm broken. I'm like, why? And it sounds so simple, but it's true. I'm like, every choice that we make is actually contributing to our future. So why can't we make better choices now? And once you are all in, when you learn more, I think education is key. The more you understand, the more you realize there's so much I can do. And I was looking at your Instagram the other day and I saw your morning rituals. And I think for an outsider to look in, someone who doesn't live the life that you live or been through anything that you've been through, or even is in this realm, right? They'll be like, shit, that's a lot. How does this guy do it all? Like, some might say, oh, they're obsessed with this. And you do get labeled with that kind of stuff. And I had that happen to me as well. But I learned not to care about it because I was like, this is my life. Why does it concern you? So when I started taking care of myself, I didn't care if people told me they thought I was obsessed with exercise because I'd be doing my rehab. I'd be going to strength train. I'd be waking up early. I'd be going for walks. And they're like, you exercise so much during your day. But I was like, we're not designed to be static. And I've learned that because anytime I'm sitting at a computer for too long, I have to get up for a postural change because I ache. And those who sit at desks for 8 hours a day, they're like, oh, but pain's normal. Pain is not normal. And again, the office workers that come in every day, I see them. The more you teach them this, they are definitely learning more and they're realizing, but you have to wait for everyone to come to their own realization, right? And then I remember one time someone told me their step count on average was 3,000 steps. I was like, what? But I can't say that. I'm like, okay, well, how can we get that a little higher?
That's actually quite a lot. Like I know people with way less than that.
That's so scary.
It's scary, yeah.
But again, like if you say that, and okay, my first reaction is what?
Yep.
Then I'm like, okay. And they're like, what? Well, what do you do? And I'm like, you don't want to know what I do because I lead a very different life. But at the same time, I'm like, if you do want to know, like on average, probably 15 to 20K. They're like, how? I'm like, well, I walk to work. I walk home from work. In between, if I'm sitting for too long, I will get up. Anytime I do get a chance, if I can do a meeting on a call, I'll go for a walk. Like my mom used to say, like, you cannot sit still. I'm like, it's not that I cannot sit still. It's that I don't want to sit still. And I think there's a difference. Like, it's not like ADD or anything like that. And if you have that, I mean, actually, fidgeting is actually proven to be quite good as well. And there's so many negative connotations which are associated with moving, I've realized. And that just, I find that so backwards because we're being told to sit in a box all the time.
I do also think a big part of it is people projecting their own insecurities and inability to move themselves, knowing that it's something they should be doing, but haven't cultivated the habit to be able to do it yet. And when you see someone else doing the thing that you want to achieve and you can't, it's really easy to project. I mean, I've done that in so many parts of my life in the past, but that's definitely something I've experienced for sure. And I do think there's a difference, not having the inability to sit still because perhaps there's an addiction to like stress, which I think is how many of us live.
Yeah.
That's different because, we also know that the only way to really recover the nervous system is stillness and quietness and doing nothing. But yours is intentional movement, and me as well. Like my knee feels better the more I move, and the less I sit, the more I walk, the more I explore different patterns of movement, the better my knee responds. So it's like, even the age-old advice of don't run too much because you'll wear out your knees. It's like, actually, if you equip your knees to be able to handle running, you keep running a part of your life forever.
But that's key. It's equipped. Like, you have to have the body that's prepared to take the impact.
Yes.
And again, if you look around, most people think going for exercise, it's easy. I'm just going to go for a run.
Let's talk about running, because I think running is great because everyone runs, and I think people who start exercise, which a lot of people, it's the first thing we start. So, like, what do we actually, if you were to take this down to like a joint by joint level, like what should we be able to do before we actually get up and put a pair of shoes on and go running?
I literally think you have to look at your hip, knee, ankle, and also your spine.
Yeah.
But even your feet, because so many people have flat feet. Then everything starts collapsing inwards. Their arches collapse inwards. Then you have this inward rotation of your limbs. And a very simple thing that someone can do, and I actually do like to do this with runners, is lie down on your back, find Shavasana, and just look at what their body looks like. And naturally, if you think about the human anatomy, the diagram, palms up, what Shavasana looks like is toes fall out, palms up, everything slightly rolling out. I've seen so many people feet in and actually like shoulders rolling in. And you think that lying on your back is simple. And I think that's been a nice way just to say, like, look at this, and then you highlight everything that's been there. And I think mobility it's hard because it's not really tangible a lot of the time, right? They're like, there's no way I can do that. And you're like, well, let's just work on just lying down on the floor. Set a realistic goal. But when it comes to running, I would look at how their legs are first. I would see if they can squat or not. I can see if they can do a single leg exercise, lunge, step up, whatever it is. But you have to look at the sport itself and break it down into the requirements of the sport. Single leg, you should be able to toe off, and which means if your feet do not work well, you're going to be compensating somewhere else, and the body will adapt to whatever throws its way. So a lot of people, and I work in Happy Valley as well, so I see a lot of runners, and when you see the way they're running, it's painful.
Sometimes you think, how are they actually running? It's really impressive that they keep on doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's constant, and they're going lap after lap after lap. But they will pay for it one way or another. Yeah,
that was something from FRC that I took away, like my own toes. I'd never ever even thought that the toes would have any function in performance, which is so stupid because of course they do. And remember they had us do toe lift-offs, right? So they like toe cars and lift-offs. And I remember trying to do it, and I couldn't get my big toe off the floor at all. And I couldn't segment my toes doing different things consciously. And, then you think about something as simple as running. That your toe is the last thing to leave the floor. And if you don't have,
literally that range, the impact, and if you walking as well, let alone running. Yeah, walking. Right? So, I mean, if you don't have that range of motion and you cannot actually put the toe in that range and you can't control them, like what's to say what's happening up the kinetic chain? And
so I swear that after doing that, I looked at my feet and I could see that I thought, I'm pretty sure both my toes were moving in the direction of like a bunion forming. Yeah. Right. So big toes were like pushing outwards. I could feel like I could see a bone. And my dad has horrendous bunions. Like he's also got awful toes. I don't mean to look at. I mean, they're quite bad to look at as well. Sorry, Dad, but because you do listen every now and then. But he's had terrible bunions for years. And they kind of talked about this being a contributor to potentially why bunions form. Yeah. And I remember just looking down at my feet thinking like, I really don't want to get bunions. So ever since, and we talked about this the other day, I've done toe cars and I haven't missed a day of toe cars ever. And I swear my feet are straightening. Like, like sure. I can actually see my big toes over the last 3 to 4 years and now getting straighter, and my feet don't turn out as much.
Do you want to know something about bunions?
Yeah,
my mum used to say the same thing, but not like she would never think exercise would fix anything. So I remember when we were younger, same thing for her. You could see her feet were they're by no means ugly feet. They're beautiful feet. But I remember her saying from a young age, she's like, you need to use these bunion correctors before you have correctors. So she tried to make us use these things at home, which were like, they were awful. They would strap around your foot.
I've never even heard of it.
It's terrible. It basically had like a brace on the outside of your big toe. and on both feet, and you just had to wear them. You wore them to sleep and everything. And I just thought
Like a splint.
basically it was a splint. Yeah. I was like, there's no way I can keep this up, but mom said to do it. So we did it for a bit. It didn't do anything, but that's also why when he said that in the FRC, I'm glad I've always known how to use my feet, and I kind of play the piano with my feet, right? I get teased by it. I know if Ben or Lee listens to this, they call me Skeletoes because I have got feet like hands, and I take pride in them. And that was a moment I was like, my feet are useful because I can do all this stuff, and I could spread them. And then I recognize as well that that big toe that maybe even looked like it was going to become a bunion, that quickly disappeared the moment I started playing with my feet. And that's where I think yoga came in quite handy for me, because when I did start it, they talk a lot about grounding through your feet and adopting practices from yoga, from strength training, from FRC. I've kind of evolved my training into what it is now, and you just see the benefits across so many different styles of training, and you just create something else that works for you. So I've done that over time to see what works for me. And when you have your audience, you pick and see what the demands are for their everyday living, and then you shape it for them.
Can I ask you, because I've never spoken to anyone about this, but toe spaces.
Yeah.
So they're making a massive push right now, sponsoring loads of athletes, loads of people talking about toe spaces. What are your thoughts?
It's so funny you say that, because when I see it, I can't help but think, is it a gimmick? But then I also see very well-respected people using it. So I can't say I know enough about it, but I
guess my first thoughts is like, okay, we're addressing passive ranges here, right? So we're pushing the toes into a position which might be more optimal, but I think that alone is not perhaps going to deliver the results we want.
Actually, I have a friend who I will not name. They were really into toe spacers, and they're really into everything that's new and upcoming, and they do their research. But one time she used them for a bit too long, and she actually, I think, had a toe injury from it. So
I could see that.
Yeah, it'd be like doing passive stretching for too long, overdoing it,
and then using it straight away. Yeah, the whole concept of new range is weak range.
Yeah, so I think that with that, I mean, you can always think of passive range versus active range. You need a balance, and if I were to use them, I would use them for a small amount of time before I did anything else, but I would make sure I pair it with an active range. So in my exercises, I would make sure I have toe spreading, or I have toe lift offs, or I've got pails rails for whichever, big toe that needs it, for example. I don't use them, but I also don't have an issue with toe spacing. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, let's go back to your coaching practice.
Okay.
Because we talked about lots of different things that have influenced you now. I know you're running classes, so you run actually mobility classes, which I think is awesome. And I told you I'm going to come down. I'm definitely going to do one. But talk through. Maybe let's just talk about those classes that you're running. What is the typical structure? Like what goes into a mobility class or a mobility session? I know it's super individualized and it's super case dependent, but to the listener, thinking about maybe you can even take this one step further, which is like what faults do we make in our mobility practices when we're doing things that we think should be improving our mobility? What are we missing?
The intent. I think that's the first part. If you were to ask me a typical class, so I have two different classes, two very different styles, but they have the same core components. One is the outdoor classes that I teach in Happy Valley. It's kind of like a blast, what you would think of as a boot camp, but it's definitely not that, because it's not just do burpees, squats, run, all of that. Actually, there's very minimal running in it. It's a lot more strength-based, but at the beginning, we always do some form of CARs, whether it is actually global CARs, which is basically your whole body, or I choose priorities. So if I were to say,
based on the session,
not
or
even
based
just
on
based
life.
off of okay. I'd say based off of the typical body that comes into classes. And the beauty of the classes that I teach is they're small, but most people have very common ailments or common limitations, and shoulders and hips are what I find the easiest to teach to the newbie coming through. So I won't teach someone, let's go through CARs and I'm going to teach you CARs, because you know how complex it can be to do it correctly. So I will break down a movement and then maybe go through axial rotations, talk about how the shoulder joint sits inside the socket. It's a ball and socket joint, which is why we want to make sure we're going through these ranges of motion. I find that it's easiest to teach the hip and the shoulder because they're both ball and socket joints. So I basically say, if you were to flip your body, like fold it in half, your head all the way down, basically your hands are your toes, Your elbows are your knees, your wrists are your ankles, your shoulders are your hips, and the spine is what connects it all. Spinal training is so boring for most people, and they don't know how to do it. So in a class setting, realistically, you need to engage your people. You're not going to be like, okay, we're going to do a spinal class now, and we're going to do cat-cows for an hour. So I break it down. Pelvic movement first. Look at, okay, the spine is designed. We've got, this is the shape of the spine, which each part, like what each part of the spine can do. So talk about the anatomy, but it's not an anatomy lesson where I'm going to say, here is a picture. I get them by moving. So the Happy Valley class will have spine, shoulders, hips. Also link it up with whatever the meat of the class is, the main course. So if I'm teaching the foundational movements of pull-ups, maybe squats, and actually just push-ups. So very simple body weight movements that everyone can do in a park. When you look at someone, you know if you see bad form. But you also know, you can look around a park and be like, that person knows what they're doing. They know how to engage their core. They know how their elbows sit. They actually know how to fix their shoulder blades in it. So in a class like that, I'd go through scapular movement. I'd go through owning your end range movements in terms of overhead movements, because we're going into an overhead pull. When it comes to hips, okay, I almost always do some kind of a hip car, because most people don't recognize how hard it is to do. So bit by bit, sometimes I do full cars, sometimes I do partial ranges. But at the end of the day, it's working towards the goal. And the goal is the movement that you do on an everyday basis. So that's kind of the flow of the class of an outdoor class. On Fridays, I teach at the Upper House, which is the one that you want to come to. That one is really I love it because it's just strict mobility. It's kind of like a mobility flow. And because I teach it with a yoga brand, I make it link with yoga, and I practice yoga a lot. So I like understanding how my joints can be stronger in these stretch positions. And a lot of yogis who I've worked with, they have some kind of pain, but they can stretch. They can look beautiful in these poses. And at the same time, when I do it, I'm like, I wouldn't want to do a back bend like that because I know my lower back is taking it. So how can I make it better? And I don't want to disrespect, yoga at all, because I haven't studied it, but I also know that the body is still designed a certain way. So if you are going to compress into your lower spine through, say, your lumbar spine in a deep, deep back bend, if you don't get back pain, cool. That's not for everyone. Sometimes you might just be that one person that can really do it, and that's fine. And you have no other issues across your body. But most of the time, I would say there's always something that comes up. So with that one, it's kind of like a flow style class. Like there's music playing, you're in a heated room. So when I go through the warm up, you don't have to spend as long doing it. And I really hone in on the rotation of the joints. So that one is actually joint by joint. And I often have like a class theme. So today's going to be shoulders, overhead movement. Today's going to be rotation through the hips, internal, external rotation. Today's going to be hip extension. How do we link it all together? There's not necessarily an end goal, because I don't want to have to work towards a peak pose, because this class isn't just for yogis. It's actually for everyone to come through. And I have a lot of my personal clients who I teach one-on-one come to those classes as well, because it's complementary for them. And they also know that I'm not going to do it the way that I do when I have a voice telling me exactly how to do it at every point. So I always warn people, if they're new in my class, I just say, look, I talk a lot, because every single detail is important. That's what I was talking about, intent, because the intent is to connect your brain with your body. Your intent is to really be super present with your body, and movement is what we're practicing right now. And I just like to have like a very well-rounded class where it kind of builds. You have a peak where you will be dripping in sweat and people are like, oh, and I say, sounds are very welcome. But at the very end, because it's so taxing on your nervous system, there's always downtime. Like we do finish with stretches. And that's why I say stretches versus mobility, because there's a big difference between the two. And at the very end, often I'll share something that maybe I've been going through mentally, something that I like to try and bring people back into the moment, maybe some food for thought. We don't necessarily have to share anything we're going through, but I find that when you have like a daily dose of, maybe it's a quote, maybe it's some kind of inspiration, it allows you to just chill out and be, like you said, slow down and be in silence for a bit. So I love those classes a lot. I find that I've never been to anything like it. So I've really enjoyed creating it. And And I know that there's so many ways I can continue to make it better. And there are so many times I actually also wish I had someone I could go to who could teach me like that. And so I would love to be able to build that and have, more coaches out there teaching these classes so I can go to these classes. But yeah, I that's kind of what I do.
Thinking about the people who attend these classes, so a lot of them, I'm guessing, is like kind of general population, not specifically working towards a sporting goal, perhaps. Like you said, people trying to get themselves out of pain or be preventative so pain doesn't come in. Do you have kind of like a checklist of things that, at a bare minimum, you think the human body should be able to do? Obviously, the splits and full range of motion is amazing, but for the general demands of life, for most of us, what are you looking for?
I mean, I do the things like, can you squat? And I'm not saying I do a squat assessment every time. Sometimes I do, depending on what the class is about. But I think that we should be able to do what our body's designed to do. Reach your arm overhead. Squat down into a position which your ankles don't lift off the ground. Sitting up straight, and what that means is actually spinal extension without rib cage flaring. I think maybe I view the body in a different way. So if you had to tell me what movements, it would be a squat, an overhead movement without like any compensation into anywhere else. Reaching behind your back. So shoulder internal rotation. For girls, it's actually putting on a bra strap, for example. Like,
yeah, I'd be completely fucked if I was a girl.
Yeah, seriously though, because shoulders, you'd see so many people who cannot do that. I just always think like, what do you do every day? You have to ask yourself that. But your movement shouldn't be limited to just that. And yeah, so squats. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so hard.
It's hard to say.
I guess the way that I always see it is that that's part of the thing. Part of what has really attracted me to CrossFit is the extremes of ranges that you need to be able to hit in order just to do the most basic movements in the sport. When I first came in, I couldn't do an overhead squat. I mean, I couldn't even squat actually. I couldn't do an air squat, but I couldn't put my arms over my head. I couldn't do an overhead squat with a broomstick. Couldn't get close.
Play rugby.
Yeah.
Like
I think that's why I was so
like,
broken. But so I think it's funny. It's when I first picked up when I had my first shoulder injury, which was my first year at uni, playing at uni. When I think about what I was doing, like stretching and like recovery was never a part of training for me.
Yeah.
It was like go all in on the hard stuff and skip the other stuff because it didn't seem worthwhile. And so what happened over time was that I just got tighter and tighter and tighter. Like throw on top of that, shitty diet at university, no sleep, way too much alcohol. Then there's more tension in the system. Throw on top of that a very confused, lost teenager who's trying to find himself, who's people pleasing every single day. Throw even more stress in the system. So basically had this really, really inflamed body that was holding more and more tension every single day. And it didn't take much. And in one game, something really innocuous, got tackled, landed on my elbow, and my shoulder just like ripped out the socket. So yeah, like when I think back to that, that's definitely why that was a catalyst, I think, for that injury. And then I basically had 3 years in a row where it was just shoulder, surgery. But the protocol for rehabilitation back then was, and I still remember the surgeon's words, was you need to be tight to ensure you don't injure again.
Yeah.
So the tighter you can be, the less chance of a recurring dislocation. So, okay, cool. I'll just won't do any more stretching, and I'll make sure I never take my arm into these extreme ranges, which is where I would snap. Yeah, which is where I would snap. And so what would happen was that, there was one time I remember after, I think it was my second reconstruction, I went through the whole protocol and did all the rehab to a T, and if not more. But mobility wasn't part of the rehab protocol because I was told not to go there. And then in my first game back for Hong Kong playing against Taiwan, I was at scrum half. And I basically did a diving pass and I landed on my elbow, just literally just like falling on the floor, and my shoulder dislocated. And that was the catalyst. And I was like, okay, something's not right. Like I need to question what I'm doing right now. I'm following things blindly and I'm not asking questions as to why. And that was when I started to dig a little bit deeper. And then coming into CrossFit, genuinely thinking, how am I ever going to be able to do an overhead squat? Like I'm so far away from it. I don't even know like where to begin. Genuinely, like was so lost.
Where did you begin?
I had a coach. So I hired a coach, and I literally said, like, the snatch was like this eluding movement. Like I had enough grit and enough like raw capacity to be able to move through the other movement. I could do handstand push-ups with extreme like compensation through my spine, just because I was strong enough to get through it. I could do kipping pull-ups even though I had no overhead range, because I was strong enough just to like stay in this really. So I wasn't efficient with anything, but just good enough to be able to do the movements. But obviously you hit a ceiling very, very quickly, because like you're just loading a dysfunctional pattern. Like you're just not being efficient with your time and your energy. So yeah, I just sought help, found a coach who had some knowledge in helping other athletes who were very tight in the overhead squat, and we just built it from the ground up. Like I started doing more mobility work. So rather than doing 2 strength sessions a day, 2 hard CrossFit sessions a day, I did 1 CrossFit session and I did 1 just mobility session. And you know, I was actually just telling this story the other day to one of our coaches on an affiliate program. I remember being stuck at trying to get an 120 kg clean for maybe 3 years. Could never get it. Could hit 115, but could never hit 120. And the reason being, my squat position was just so poor. You know, if I was fortunate enough to catch it, I would just be kind of bent over or squashed in the bottom and just wouldn't be able to stand it up. And so after a year of not training twice a day, and instead replacing one of those sessions with movement work, and movement work was like everything. It was like there was cars, there was a lot of static stretching, there was a lot of foam rolling, there was a lot of just loaded end range stretching. And then after a year of that, having not done a heavy clean, I almost cleaned 135, like almost 15 kilograms added onto a clean in a year. And then I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense.
Something working.
Yeah, I did. That doesn't make sense. Like I was cleaning twice a week and couldn't hit 120.
Yeah.
And I basically stopped cleaning, worked to my positions, and I added 15 kilograms to my lift. And so that for me was like a huge light bulb moment, where it was like, okay, positions, you know, like leverages, you know, positions of efficiency is going to allow you to. So rather than me just working really, really hard on trying to add more weight into the bar, it's way easier for me just to spend 10 minutes improving my squat position. Like that's way less taxing. Why wouldn't I do that?
Less is more, right?
Yeah. And so, you know, now as a screening, you know, if someone comes and says, I want to make it to the CrossFit Games, you know, one of the first things I'm going to look at is movement quality. And it's like, if you don't have that limitation of movement, you just got such a big head start already, because we can start loading you knowing that you're going to be totally fine and your body's going to adapt. But if we're loading crappy positions, which is exactly what I did for so long, you're going to hit a ceiling really, really soon. And you just at some point going to have to address it. Like no one at the CrossFit Games moved badly. You just don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, 5-6 years ago, yeah, you had like some anomalies who just wouldn't move well. They'd be tight, but you just can't get away with that now. And like everyone moves like a swan. You know, you've got like serious weightlifters moving so much load, who can do crazy things with gymnastics, who can do the splits. Like, you know, you got 100 kilogram men who are so jacked out of their mind who can do the splits. It's just pretty cool.
It's amazing.
And that's really what attracted me to it, because it was so opposite to everything I'd ever done as a player. And, you know, in hindsight, I would love to have seen what my career could have been like had I just had an appreciation for mobility, or had some guidance or mentorship to tell me that it's important. I think, you know, looking at high level athletes who are able to play at the top of their sport, like for long careers, like LeBron James's, you know, Rafa Nadal's, like Federer's, like you got those athletes in all those sports, they're all mobile. Like none of those guys are tight.
Yeah.
Even in rugby, like some of the best players, like they move beautifully. The only ones who can get away with it, I think, are the ones that are huge. You know, if you're 120, 130 kilograms, you're just bigger than everyone else, that you never really get put into the positions to break. So those people can get away with it, but everyone else, like, they're very mobile athletes, even in the sport of rugby. So, you know, it's only now looking at sport through the lens that I'm in now, I see the appreciation for it. And, you know, it's something that has to be addressed in the coaching process.
I think something that you asked me earlier in terms of how would I assess what people would need, it reminded me that when I work with people, it's a lot of them have kids, and it's actually being able to kneel down and play with their kids. It's that longevity component, right? And it's because the everyday person who isn't necessarily playing sport, I love the high performance side as well, but the general population that comes through, they don't have that to strive towards. But then they realize like, oh, I threw my back out picking up my kid the other day, and it's so common. And so I would then say, look at your everyday life and what is it that you take pleasure in? And what do you want to do every day? And most of the time, because people complain about pain, it's what would you like to do without pain? And how can we get you there? And yeah, I think that's where the squat movement patterns, the just kneeling down as well. You'll notice people have to use their hands a lot. So, can you get up off the floor without your hands? That's another simple one that you can look at. Yeah.
Actually, just on that, just thinking back to my experience with FRC, like my wrists,
Mm.
and even thinking about the whole concept of, do you have the active range of motion at a joint that's required for you to do whatever the cool movement is that's required of you? So like there's something so simple like a push-up, which for most of us, like the wrist is at 90 degrees of flexion, or just, would say 90 degrees, flat on the floor, the forearm straight. If you take away the floor, can you put your wrist into that position? And I remember just sitting in that FRC being like, holy shit, I can't do anything. Like I can't, everything he's asking me to do.
Everyone around the room was like trying to look at their
hand.
hand.
Yeah. And I was like, really hope he's not looking at me right now, but I couldn't do anything. And it was just one of the things the FRC said, I think, was, so many injuries occur when the load placed on the joint outweighs the load bearing capacity of the joint. Yeah. And I could definitely that was a huge connecting of dots for me, because I was like, yeah, I think almost all my injuries have occurred when that's happened. It's been, the joint's been taken out of a range that can't. So, my motivator with my movement work now is this: I want to be able to do pretty much any physical task that comes my way. So if it's like climb a wall, it's play a game of basketball, it's play football, throw a rugby ball around, snatch, do a handstand. Like I'd love to, for the end, till the day that I die, to be able to do all that stuff, What about you? What's motivating you in your movement practice?
I think same for me, actually. I like being able to do cool shit. I like being able to be strong. I think more than anything, going through the postpartum journey actually was an awesome new experience. Actually, the pregnancy was an awesome new experience as well. My body changed in so many ways. I didn't know what to think, but I just open arms, embraced it all. It's hard to go through that. I think, especially being someone who's been active my whole life, and I've been fit, not my whole life, but since when I first started my journey. And I guess at a certain point, you're almost trying to uphold your body image. And then when you let go of that, pregnancy was a beautiful new gateway to like a whole other world. Like I struggled as a girl growing up, and I always thought like I was bigger than my counterparts because I had a lot of Asian friends growing up, and I'm half, but I was always taller, a little bit more broader than my friends. So I was big at school, but then when it came to rugby later, I was not big. So I didn't know there was an identity crisis, and those were kind of critical moments in my life, which I started to learn by going inwards. I was able to figure out who I was. But certain parts of my life then led to me not caring. And it's not that I didn't care. I thought I didn't care, but really then I manifested in another way. And then that stillness, being able to be quiet with your thoughts, was a huge thing. So when people ask me, how did you deal with the injury? How did you deal with all of this stuff? Meditation and journaling was the best thing for me. And when I drop off on that kind of practice, I notice when my headspace just needs a bit more. So I might be going off topic here, but one of the critical parts of my life so far, I think a turning point, was my decision to leave rugby. And I didn't realize I was kind of spiraling into, I don't know if it was depression, but I was very unhappy where I was. And when I was going in this negative cycle of just constantly coming back, feeling like I hated doing what I did because I didn't have the love for the game again. And it wasn't because I didn't love the game. It was the environment I was in that just really put a dampener on everything. And a big part of it was because I was told I wasn't big enough. And no matter what I tried to do, they'd put me on all these programs. I was on a hypertrophy program almost 5 days a week. But then they told me they wanted me to be the fittest player as well because I was good at running. And my science background was like, how? But boss is telling me to do it. Coach is telling me to do it. So I was so torn because I had the knowledge, but I couldn't speak up. And being in the culture where speaking up is disrespecting, where do you draw that line? So I hung in there for almost 2 years too much. But I got to the point where I just couldn't do it. I realized that, and it was because I started writing out more things. What do I want? And I realized that I just wanted to be happy, and it sounds simple, but happiness for me is a choice. And then I realized I'm like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to resent rugby. Rugby has been a huge part of my life. And so when I decided to leave, I can still remember the day I couldn't even go to my coach to tell her. I had to go to her boss, who was the men's coach at the time. And I just said, how do I get out? I want to leave now. Like, it was a lunchtime and he's like, you got training? I was like, I'm out. I don't want it. And I'd had a couple of talks before. I'd expressed my concerns. But that moment in my life to leave, and I still remember, like, after I left, then I was like, what did I just do? And I was very, like, it was a whirlwind of emotions. I called my sister. I was like, I just quit and I'm leaving the SI right now. And I started leaving to walk out the main gates, and then I saw Ben, who is my husband now, but at the time he just saw me crying, and he's like, he knew something was up. I didn't tell him I did it then. I just said I was having a meeting. And then I left, and I didn't want to turn around, and I didn't go back for 2 weeks, and I left all my stuff there. I communicated with my teammates, but more so saying, I made a decision. I'll talk about when I'm ready, but I had to disappear. I had to take myself out of it, and it was so raw. I actually felt like I couldn't talk about rugby for probably months after that, even the next year or two, because I didn't realize how much I'd been traumatized by it.
So what did bringing it back up? What would that trigger?
Now I feel a lot better being able to talk about it, but I felt angry. I felt like the system is so broken at times, and the reason why I chose to leave was actually the defining moment for me. Was I remember going into the nutritionist, and I'd lost my period for 2 years, but I was told that was normal, and I was like, it's not normal. But I was like, okay. And then I got told, just eat more chocolate. It was something ridiculous like that. And I was like, so you're not telling me to eat, like a more nutritious meal. Like you could lay it all out. We had all the resources. But what was being told to everyone was, it's fine. You'll be fine. Just, suck it up, basically. And I couldn't stand that. And for me, I was so young at the time. Similar to you, actually. I retired quite early. And yeah, so I retired quite early, but at the time for me, I was just worried, like, if I don't have my period now, can I have a family in the future? Yep. And I didn't think I wanted to have kids then and there, of course not. But knowing what I had chosen to do to my body, which was essentially abuse the body, I didn't know if I'd have a future. So that was a really scary thought. And then compounded with everything else, I just realized I don't want that anymore. And so I think it was actually the whole period thing that really struck me quite deep. And so I can still remember it took me, I went back to, so I played rugby professionally, and then before that I was actually playing netball, not professionally, but for Hong Kong. And then I decided to leave, and I wanted to go play rugby for fun again. So I went back to play for club, and at Valley it was just nice to be able to play with my friends again with no stress. I was like, I just get to run around and feel like I can, step, play, tackle, everything. And I realized that the love of the game was still there. So I was so happy to step away from it.
It wasn't the game, it was the environment.
No, it was stress. It was stress on stress on stress. And the team culture was slowly dying. It was really quite an awful, heavy cloud that you were living under, and that was your reality. And you couldn't say anything about it. So I make it sound awful. I mean, there are lots of changes, and there are going to be politics in every sport. And I feel a bit, now I'm good, but I think at the time I felt so bitter that that's how it had to end. But yeah, then I was able to, I wouldn't say I processed it. I think I just put it away. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to channel my energy into something else. And that's when I started my business properly. Like I had my clients on the side, but then I channeled it into, okay, I'm going to open up a studio. And that's how kind of Calibrate was kind of born. Probably about 4 months later. And I just put everything into that. And I know that if I go wholeheartedly with everything, I'm a passionate person. And as long as I'm doing something that I enjoy, I will put everything into it, which I'm very grateful. I don't know where I learned it from, but I've always kind of had it in me. But yeah, so going back to that, then I decided to go back to play netball. And then they were like, well, trials for the national team are back on. So I was like, okay, screw it. Let's just go play. And then I made the team. But I knew there was one time I'd landed on my knee in a game, and I swear I thought I shattered my patella. It was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced. It was impact. It was landing on it. And I was like, I'm done. I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
Sorry, am I allowed to?
Yeah.
And I genuinely couldn't walk on it without pain for months. And I had no health care, so I didn't go get it checked. And I just left it. I was like, hey, I'm just not going to play. I had no pressure to play any sport. And then I remember when that whole netball thing came up, I have tremendous pride playing for my country, no matter what sport it is. But like Hong Kong is my home through and through. And no matter what background I have, I will just, it's like deeply rooted in me. And so the opportunity came to play for Hong Kong again. And I was like, awesome. Like we haven't had a tournament in ages, and we had the Asian champs in Singapore. And I still remember I made the team, which I was super grateful for, but I shouldn't have passed the physical, like the testing. I couldn't jump off my right leg. And so I was doing everything off my left. So that's a recipe for disaster. But I think I was also still recovering from what had happened in rugby, that I wanted to move on so badly that I was like, I'm on to my next challenge. So then I decided to play, and I don't know how I got cleared to play, but I did. And then in the first game, I snapped my ACL, and it was a full, just remember landing.
On the bad knee or the good knee?
On the bad knee. But it was, we'd been working on this drive, like I was playing wing attack, and I remember we just had to drive into the pocket, and that was the one drive, and we couldn't nail it in the trainings, but we nailed it that one time in the game. But I remember landing on my outer leg, and everyone heard it. Like there was a video of it. The commentator was like, it was like loudest pop. And I just remember thinking, I felt my entire knee just,
yeah.
And I didn't know what had happened, but because it was so quick, I thought I was okay. But I knew it was bad because the other team physio came over and they all ran over. They're like, don't move her. Then you're in denial for a second.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, I'll be fine. It kind of blows up a little bit. And then I still remember my family flew over to watch me. So I'm very glad I had my family there with me. I was probably in peak physical condition. And then again, start of the tournament, it's not about me. It's about the team. They still have the whole tournament to play. So the only thing I could do was went to hospital, came back. And then I just said, look, everything is, like, you guys have to keep going. It's a team goal. But then for me, then on, I just said, well, I'm going to work on my prehab, because if I'm going to get surgery, I have to start now. So I think my mindset was just go, and not even allow myself to fully process it. And then soon after that served me very, very well until I hit the lulls of what injury can do to you mentally. And then you don't realize how down you can get. And when you hit those lows, you're like, now what? How do I keep going? And then again, journaling, meditation, that stuff kept me grounded. But then the having a physical goal to work towards, having milestones for the ACL rehab, for example, really helped. And that's where I actually started documenting everything on Instagram. And it wasn't for the outside world. It was actually just for me to hold myself accountable for what I do. And in hindsight, that was awesome, because people then knew me as the person who is great with knee rehab. Then they started seeing the mobility, because the mobility was such a core component of how I could actually then prepare myself for surgery and then come out of surgery. And then again, I documented literally from day 0 on to the day that I was back playing netball again. So.
And did you is that documented on Instagram, or did you keep a separate?
No, it's actually all on Instagram.
Oh, awesome.
And I've had randoms message me like, I'm on this, and I'm like, this week of my ACL recovery, I was wondering if you could help me. I'm like, it's case by case, but here is all, like, it was literally just the hashtag. Yeah. I was like, here's the video library, but you have to go case by case. And we're not saying that's going to be the be it and all,
Yeah, I've always done that every time I've had an injury, at least since I've been a coaching professional. I have documented like the whole journey from start to finish, and I'm documenting my whole journey now right? with my stem cell stuff, just in case someone asks me.
It's so cool though.
I even think that the clinic who are dealing with giving people treatment, the same treatment I had every day, I would love to be able to present something to them at the end of however long and be like, hey, if you ever wanted to use this, like, feel free to pass this on. Like, I've always been a big advocate of paying it forward.
Yeah,
it's cool that you did that.
I don't actually remember what we were talking about, but
Yeah,
that's
either.
yeah,
But cool story.
yeah,
I mean, so I think we haven't mentioned it, but we actually both played rugby at the same time. You came in at the start of, I guess, women's rugby being professionalized. I believe it was after the Asian Games where it became, Hong Kong rugby was put into the Hong Kong Sports Institute and recognized as a government sport. Because that was actually the year that halfway through that season is when I stopped. And I have a similar story to you, just deciding, you know what, I'm not going to continue. What's actually really funny? It's like, so a lot of that memory has been wiped away from my head because it was just wasn't me in those times. But just remember, hand saying like, I'm going to move on. And also feeling how liberating playing rugby without the pressure was after that. Even hearing your ACL story, like that reminds me of mine. I remember thinking, I'm going to look down at my knee and my leg's going to be literally like 90 degrees to the side. That's in my head. That's what I thought based on how it felt. I remember just looking down and being like, oh,
that's all.
Actually looks all right. No, it actually looks totally fine. So I remember just standing up, my leg just going backwards, like, whoo, and I was like, whoa, okay. No, not fine. Can definitely resonate with, and your storytelling has brought up a lot of memories to me. And even just like the thoughts around rugby and not having, I still think I've got more processing to do actually on it.
I think I do too.
Yeah, I think
I'm a lot further along than where I was because I knew before it was just brush it under the rug, which is very common with a lot of people processing any kind of emotion. So it's good to talk about it. It really is. It's just sometimes you're like, where do I begin? Because there's so much to unpack there. So
yeah. Well, Steph, I mean, we got so much more that we could talk about, but I think that's going to be a part 2. What have you got coming up in your life? Is there anything exciting on the horizon?
Yes. Actually. So
that you would like to share?
I would love to share. I mean, it is something that I realize that I've been building towards for a long time. But as sad as I am to leave my physical space now in terms of Calibrate, it's been a very special space. But we are actually going to be combining with the gym, which is my husband's gym as well. So it's actually really nice to be able to build a bigger product together. I can see the challenges of working with family, and we're going to be in each other's spaces all the time, but I'm excited for it because I've done a lot of internal work, and I don't know if I can say the same for anyone else, but I think it's important for you to understand that because you work on yourself, you then know how to work with other people. So from the outside, while people say, oh my gosh, you're going to be in each other's space all the time, how's this going to go? We've learned how to figure it out, and it's going to continue to be a process that we learn more of. But at least I know for now I can talk more with Lee, his business partner, about work and that we don't bring work home. And I think that's a really important boundary to set, even though at times I know I can get carried away because, like I said, I'm very passionate about what I do and I want to do it at home. But switching off is huge. And being home with our baby Sienna when we're home to play with her. I don't want to be working. I don't want my mind to be on anything other than her and like watching her move and just seeing the new things that she's developed each and every day. And I mean, you've seen her recently.
Yeah. I couldn't believe how much she progressed. And I mean, I probably saw you guys 2 months ago.
Yeah,
and like a different baby completely.
Like,
she's walking and saying some things and like
she's hilarious.
Yeah, she is hilarious.
So yeah, I think exciting new chapter to be able to have everything in one spot. Watch the space to be able to see what we can do with actually linking all of our backgrounds together, because the two of them are also, well, Ben's still training out there, but we're all ex-professionals in terms of sport, but we also have very different fields of expertise, I suppose. And it's been nice to be able to work with people. I have a team that I work with, and it's been so cool. They're awesome. They're all coming with us as well, so nice. I'm not leaving anyone behind. But to be able to bounce ideas off in terms of business as well, just makes me hungry for more. And I'm just so happy I get to do what I love every single day. And that sounds so cliche, but
it's true. Yeah. And I think I just wanted to say that, watching your work from the outside, and I think there was a number of years where we didn't really connect after rugby, but I've always kept an eye on Calibrate and what you've been doing. And I think you're doing amazing work. It's very unique, especially here in Hong Kong, and I think it's really necessary. So I just want to say I'm really excited for your next chapter. The gym is awesome. Benny and Lee are doing some really great stuff. So I can only imagine, bringing your skill set and your personality into it is going to be awesome for Hong Kong.
I'm excited. So yeah, watch this space.
Okay, well, we have a finishing tradition, which you don't know about.
Oh, God.
You're about to find out in 5 seconds.
Okay.
So we ask every guest to talk us through your perfect day. So you can, well, I shouldn't say too much. If you were to describe your perfect day, what would it look like?
Okay, we're talking like perfect day in my current life now, or like
Oh, your perfect day. You could be anywhere you want at any point in time in your life.
okay, I'm gonna transport myself back to Thailand, which is my happy place. It's just wake up, literally to
Good
natural
start.
sunlight,
Mhm.
like no alarm. Wake up when I feel ready, and that's usually quite early. Go for a walk on the beach, straight away. No phone, no nothing. Just listen to the ocean. Come back, maybe make like a nice hot coffee, chat with family, or read a book if no one's up. Get some kind of movement in, whether it's cars, whether it's just stretches. Sit out on the deck, have a coffee, and actually literally just look at the birds and the trees moving. That's just the morning. Everyone wakes up. Now that I have a baby, and that's what I'm saying, like right now or any other time, I just love playing with her. So I'd have like the morning time where we play, chat, do whatever. Then I would go do a gym session, do some kind of, it's more structured activity, more structured training, hang out in the sun, maybe practice some yoga in the afternoon, whether it's going to a class or not. But it's very low key. I'm an introvert, so I like to have downtime a lot. I like to be around my loved ones. Now that my family, all my sisters have kids, so the clan is growing bigger and bigger. I really just like hanging out with them. But as long as I've got nature, activity, and that social interaction, I'm getting to bed early. When I say early, I really do mean like unwinding. In the dream world, I'd like to start switching off from 7 p.m. onwards, 8 p.m. read my book in bed, and maybe like be asleep by 9. That's
actually my life now.
I know, I saw it. And I was like, damn, that's really good. I do know that right now with a kid, it's a little bit different. I can't, because I want to prioritize time spent with her, I then end up staying switched on a little bit more to catch up on some work before I can start unwinding. So that's a little tough. And I know that I'm falling off a bit of my own practice with that, but she's getting older. We're getting into more of a routine. It's a little bit of a phase that we'll continue to navigate our way through. And I don't know if it's going to get any easier. Just ride the waves as they come. But I do understand prioritizing what means a lot to me is super important. So yeah, wake up early, exercise, nature, sunshine, people, like small groups, not necessarily big groups, and then sleep early. So that's my...
Nice. Love it. Very similar day to myself.
Yeah.
Well, Stephanie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you for
so
joining me.
much.
Thank you for sharing. I think we've got a lot more to talk about, but maybe that'll be for another day.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank
So
you for
until
having
then,
me.
thank you.
Thanks.